In this video, I'll show you how I transformed my rusty chassis into this. It looks brand new and is better than ever. I started by splitting my truck apart. I did this so I could inspect the patch of rust a bit better. As you can see, it's rotten quite a bit. I really hoped it was only rotten under the reinforcement plate and not through the chassis. It's funny how a small spot of rust turned into a full restoration. As you can see, the chassis looks completely different, and there in the back I'm also stripping down the body so it can get blasted. After I split the truck apart, I pushed the chassis outside so I could give it a deep clean. It was extremely filthy and sand came out of every orifice. This is what it looks like after the first wash down with the power washer. This is the spot that made me decide to pull the truck apart. Now that it's clean, you can see that it's pretty rotten. This was the only spot on the chassis that had bubbled up like this. Apart from this spot, it was actually in very nice condition for something that's 50 years old. I then started cutting away the rotten bit, and I wasn't too happy about what I discovered underneath. Been grinding away at this bit, which is by far the worst spot on the chassis, and yeah, you can see it has rotten through, so that's not great. It will definitely need welding, but I also might get it galvanized. I then continued cutting away the old reinforcement plates. These were welded onto the chassis from factory and moisture got trapped underneath and this caused it to rust. The spot near the left front wheel was the only spot where it had rusted through. The rest was actually in pretty good condition. I then removed the engine for better access. I then continued grinding away the old reinforcement plates. This was way more work than I anticipated, so I was quite happy when a friend came to help me out. We removed the old reinforcement plates so that he could start welding up the chassis. He cut away all the rust and he tacked the first plate into position and then welded it into place. This is what's going to cover up the hole. The plate we used has the same thickness as the chassis. After he fixed up the hole, he tacked the reinforcement plate into position and worked his magic. This is what it looks like after welding. It now has new reinforcement plates and also the hole in the chassis that was underneath here has been fixed up. This is the old reinforcement plate that I grinded off. It's pretty cool to see it next to each other. Let me put it over here. Here you can see the comparison a bit. Point I had decided I wanted to get my chassis galvanized. In order to do this, I had to strip it completely. The truck being almost 50 years old, it was definitely a challenge getting everything loose. The leaf springs being the hardest. Actually, I managed. Here I'm removing the last part, the bump stops, and luckily these came off very easily. The chassis has now been separated from the axles. I'm gonna load it onto the trailer next, and tomorrow I'll be driving it to the place that's gonna thermally strip it. I'm really curious for the result. It's supposed to remove all the paint and it should also clean the inside of the chassis, which is something I want, as I'm going to dip it into a zinc bath. I then had the chassis thermally stripped and it came out looking like this. The chassis went into a giant oven that turns the paint into dust. Here you can see that I can basically just rub it off with my finger. I'll be hosing it down to remove any residue. You can see well what the chassis looks like before hosing it down. In some spots you can see the bare metal and in others there's still some paint left. The chassis went into an oven that heats up to 450 degrees. This basically vaporizes the paint. It looks like there's still paint on it, but that will be very easy to remove, as you'll see. I then started rinsing away all the leftover paint and I had a lot of fun doing so. I was really happy it came off so easily. Really important to make sure that there's no paint on or in the chassis, as then the zinc won't adhere to the metal. I think I rinsed the chassis off a total of 6 or 7 times. At the end I was so done with it. I've pressure washed this side now. There's still some rust and some stuff, some spots I need to hit a bit better, but yeah, this looks a lot better than it just did. Holy, what a difference. I actually see the metal. That's really nice. I'm really happy with this. I then started to rinse the inside of the chassis. I just inserted the pressure washer inside and rinsed out all the crud. I did this a couple times as a surprising amount of muds and twigs came out of it. Here I'm attempting to clean out the rear bumper and sprayed myself a bit. I've now put it in this position with the forklift so that any water that's still inside can pour out here from the back. because of the shape of the chassis. Otherwise all the water remains inside here in the middle. So now the remainder can drain out. I then dropped my chassis off at the galvanizing plant looking like this. And I picked it up looking like this, all shiny. I was so happy when I saw it. Here we're unloading the chassis. I'm really happy with the result. The chassis looks brand new right now and has the ultimate protection against rust. I then hosed the chassis down to remove any of the residual salts on it. Even though the galvanized frame looks really nice, I still decided that I wanted to paint it. In order to paint galvanized steel, you need to prep it. I rinsed it down really well and then degreased it with an ammonia solution. After that, I lightly scuffed the surface with a Scotch Brite pad and then let it air dry. If you don't do this, the paint will just flake off. Even after you prepared for paint, you will still need to apply a primer that's suitable for galvanized steel. The project is a big learning curve for me. Then moved the chassis inside so I could start painting it. I was lucky I could use the place next door to paint. I started applying a primer that's specially made for galvanized steel. If you do not apply this and just paint over it, the paint will simply just flake off. I started applying it with a brush and was sitting down on this little cart as my back was starting to kill me. Later on in the video I switched to a far superior method for applying paint to any surface. Many of you commented that I shouldn't paint my chassis as the galvanized steel will do its job protecting it from rust. And while I fully agree with this, there are other reasons why I decided to paint it. The first being is that I do not super like the shiny look of the galvanized steel. I know that it gets a darker gray over time, but I still don't think it would match nicely with my vehicle. The second one being is that this is not a show car, it's going to be my home on wheels, and cars with exposed galvanized frames do get stolen more often where I am located, unfortunately, so that's also a good reason to cover it up. I think it's also just cool experimenting with these things. I have never attempted any of this, so it's definitely a big learning curve for me, and I also just find it fun to do. I've learned a ton during this project and I want to keep learning, so I'll continue experimenting as long as I'm working on this Volvo. I make all the mistakes so you guys don't have to. Here you can see what it looks like after applying the first layer of primer with a brush. I will be applying 2 layers of primer and then 2 layers of the final coat. Even with the primer on, it looks nice already. I decided to purchase this paint gun. It will be the first time using it and I'm quite intimidated by it. The chassis really looks nice as is and I don't want to mess it up. I started using the paint gun. I first practiced a bit on the wooden board behind me and started spraying the chassis with it. The result actually came out really nice and I was really happily surprised by how easily the paint applied and how much time this was saving me. With the brush I created these streaks on the chassis which I didn't really like, and now with the paint gun the paint applied really evenly and it gave a nice smooth finish. It took me a bit to get the hang of the paint gun, but I'm really happy I tried it out. In the end it gave a way nicer result, it made working way quicker and more efficient, and I learned a new skill. I just watched a YouTube video on how to use the paint gun and then just bought one online and started spraying. I'll do a separate video on my DIY paint gun setup. After applying the primer, I started applying the top coat. It's important you clean the paint gun well in between so you don't get contaminated paint on the chassis. Here you can see from closer up what the paint looks like. The paint gun really did a good job and I'm quite surprised that for using it for the first time the result was so nice. I was really afraid to use it and quite afraid that I was going to make it look ugly or mess up my chassis. Here we have the finished result. I think the chassis looks great. It's galvanized inside and out now, so rust doesn't stand a chance. This is the side perspective. I'm really happy with how it turned out, especially since I was experimenting with the paint gun. The light color of the chassis might not be everyone's cup of tea, but I had a good reason to go this light. It's because if there are any damages or leaks, they will be easy to spot. And as the Volvo will become my home for the oncoming years, I want to keep it in the best shape possible while I'm on the road, and this will make that easier to do so. Also, after I applied the primer, which was almost the same color as the top coat, I saw the dark gray body standing in the background, and I really liked the contrast between the light and the dark, and that's also part of the reason why I decided to go this light. I initially wanted to paint it dark gray or black, but I'm very happy I did it like this, and it really makes the build my own. Because kind of last minute I decided to go with a different color scheme, I also repainted my axles. I used the paint gun and it gave a way nicer finish overall, and it was also way quicker. I just quickly sanded them down and then repainted them in the desired color, which is a darker gray, similar to the body. Here you can see what they look like. The paint gun gave a way nicer finish than the brushes did. And yeah, I'm really happy with the results overall. For my upcoming plans, I need to strip the body down. You can see that I did most of it already. I still need to remove some wiring and hoses in the engine bay, and then it can get blasted. Since I already got my chassis galvanized, I might as well go all in and also do the body right. After the body gets blasted, a primer will be applied by the company that's going to blast it, and then I will paint it myself, very likely in the same color it is now, because I really like it, so why not? This is my build update for now. I'm gonna continue stripping down the body, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks for watching.